the second biggest monkey head I've ever seen.
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
The definition of insanity.
Hello and welcome to episode 45 of PvA Radio. I am one of your hosts, Luke Croft. Joining me as always, freelance gaming journalist Cody Mellecline. Cody, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. I'm missing our third wheel.
I know, Larry is out of town this week. Everybody in my life is out of town. My friends from here in the Ville are all off to a week of camp. My wife is across the country, so I have been sad and alone. And I couldn't go into the office this week because I have my wife's car, and I do not trust it to not leave me stranded an hour and a half away from my house. So,
what kind of car is this?
What's that?
What kind of car?
It's a 06 Versa. And so, all right, so it's a slow news day. So I'll tell you this little story.
Please.
So Friday morning, my wife was packed up, ready to leave. And I said, hey, did you take your car to go get inspected? Because I'd asked her a couple times if she'd take to get inspected. She's like, oh, no, let me do that before I go. I was like, thank you. Because my luck is I'll get pulled over, right?
Yeah.
I get pulled. Not that I get pulled over like all the time, but I do have a ticket for an expired inspection sticker. But anyway, so she takes it, and then she texts me about an hour later and says, it didn't pass inspection. I was like, are you kidding me? So I'm driving her car around this week with a rejection sticker that's good for 15 days while we try to get whatever's wrong with it sorted out. But I'm like, I feel so trashy just driving around in this car with a giant ass rejection sticker on it. So it's been a weird week, man. This is actually the second time we're doing this intro, and I'm curious, Cody. You seem to have answered me when I said, how are you doing? I imagine that's just because you know the cadence of the beginning. Were you just gonna play along the whole entire episode?
No, I heard you before.
Oh, I just randomly cut out.
Yeah, you just cut out entirely.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense. I was like, this dude just was going with, yeah, man, I'm doing good. Thanks for asking.
I'm not gonna leave you hanging.
Thought you were just rolling with the punches. The rest of the show, you'd just be like, oh, great point. Yes, interesting.
Indubitably.
Anyway, this is PvA Radio. We get together each and every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time over here on twitch.tv/PvA Radio. And each of us brings one of the biggest gaming news stories of the week, and then we have an in-depth discussion about it. It's a collaborative audio feature article, or a CAFA, if you will. And Cody, what do we want people to do with that?
Spam that emote, and then tattoo it on your dog.
Yeah. And if you don't have a dog, go adopt a dog. Tattoo it to your dog. Yeah,
or your neighbor's dog. That works too.
Yep. We do not endorse. We don't endorse animal cruelty on this show.
No, we do
so
not.
Make sure the dog is willing and wants a tattoo.
But we do endorse making your dog look baller.
Yeah, we do endorse that. So, what's up, App State Girl? Welcome to the stream. You can chat along with us, just like App State Girl is right now, by joining us live. If you can't catch us live, though, you can watch the episode the next day over on youtube.com/PvA Radio or podcast services everywhere, including iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and we're actually going to start transcribing this into Morse code each week. So, look out for that too. Yep. Just in case some time travelers travel ahead and they're like, yeah, we don't understand how to interact with this new technology, Cody. All right, a little bit of housekeeping here at the top. June 28th, join us for a very special event that we at PvA Radio are putting on. It is going to be a 24-hour charity stream where we are trying to raise $5,000 for Able Gamers, which is a fantastic charity. I'm sure you'll hear us talk about it, show a bunch of videos about it, and I'm sure you've heard of them before. We've even brought them up if you're engaged in the Twitch community, especially. But we've got shenanigans planned, and I think that's probably the best word to sum it up. How would you sell this to your friends, Cody?
I would say it's a bunch of dudes fucking around for a really good cause.
Yep. But we're going to have some special guests. We're going to give away some prizes. It's going to be a very, very great time. That starts at noon Eastern Time on June 28th. That's Friday. And with it being 24 hours, that means we're going to go until noon the next day. All right? That's how math works. Also, I know we've been on this every other week, new episode of Press Go Live. Some scheduling stuff popped up, and there will not be a new episode this week, but we're going to hopefully get back on schedule soon. I'm getting a bunch of guests lined up, and we'll get back on track there. This is all kind of a new world to me, right? And so I'm figuring out how to plan all this. So this is a hiccup that probably could have been avoided, but yeah, I'm kind of a moron. So. But
you're doing a great job.
I'll let you know when it comes out. And then lastly, every weeknight that isn't Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time over on twitch.tv/PvA radio, we're doing a show called the PvA Nightly Rundown, where I run you through all of the gaming news that you may have missed throughout the day so that you don't look like a freaking idiot at the water cooler the next day. So you want to make sure you're here and informed. So yeah, 9 p.m. Eastern every single weeknight except for Wednesdays, which is when we do this lovely show that we're going to start now because all the housekeeping's out of the way and I'm sick of talking. Cody, let's start with you. What have you been playing?
So I've been playing. The only new thing I've been playing is a game called Observation, which I actually beat. It's a narrative puzzle game. It takes place on an international space station called Observation. And at the beginning of the game, something has gone horribly wrong. Part of the ship is separated. You don't know where anybody is, but there's one person named Emma Fisher. She's an astronaut, and she is trying to figure out what's going on. You do not play as Emma Fisher, though. You play as the station's AI, Sam, and everything in the game is seen through Sam's perspective, which is through cameras, through these mobile observation spheres that can navigate the environment. It's all basically a lot of it is simple puzzles, but the aesthetic of this thing and the narrative and the mystery are absolutely incredible. It's all kind of really like grounded, very tangible seeming technology, like all the screens, all the dials. It's kind of reminiscent of Alien in that it seems like it's a little bit dated, but still seems somewhat modern. It's one of my favorite games that I've played this year. It's one of the most unique games I've played this year. And so I'd encourage anybody who's interested in games with a sci-fi mystery that don't always feel the need to explain themselves and allow for interpretation. If you're up for that, or if you like just kind of the weird stuff that Devolver Digital is doing, I'd say go for this game. It's on PS4 and PC. It's awesome.
Who makes this? Oh, Devolver.
Yeah, it's published by Devolver. It's developed by No Code, I believe, who did another kind of interesting experiment in kind of like narrative storytelling with their last game. I can't remember the name of it.
I'm looking it up because I'm interested. It
it's
sounds
super
fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's I've been thinking about the ending since I finished it this past weekend. I can't there are a lot of things about it that I just can't get out of my head.
Okay, so I'm going to just point this out real quick. No Code is a terrible name for a developer because there's apparently a discipline called no code development. So if you look up no code developer, maybe no code game studio.
Yeah.
Let's try that. Yeah, the SEO game's hard. While I'm looking this up, Ryan Bros asks, what's the difference between Wednesday stream and the other one? So on Wednesdays, we do a show called PvA Radio, which is a podcast we've been doing now for 45 weeks, which is insane. It's almost been a year since we started this thing. It's a little bit more packaged, a little bit more planned, not as much chat interaction. We interact with the chat if you stay on topic with what we're on, and then we hang out afterwards for an after party lounge where we just kind of shoot the shit. But yeah, and you can subscribe to this podcast actually on podcast services everywhere. Just look up PvA Radio. I almost said Press Go Live. I have no idea why. Okay, here we go. Here they are. No Code. You can tell it's a slow news week also.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm taking the time to look this up. All right, here we go. Games. So Observation and then Stories Untold.
That's it. I never played it, but I heard it's really interesting.
Is this one like BAFTA awards? What is this?
Perhaps.
I don't know. I'm on this real low res screen. I can't read anything. It looks like it has. So anyway, well, that's cool. I've seen you tweeting about it a ton this week. And yeah, cool.
Yeah,
to hear you
I don't know. It's one of the more unique games I've played in a long time. But other than that, I downloaded Borderlands 2, the Handsome Collection, Borderlands 2, and the pre-sequel or whatever it's called, because it's free for PlayStation. So I've been playing a bit of that, and then I'm getting back into Sekiro because I need to beat this game.
How far into it are you?
This is gonna sound really dumb, but these are not the kind of games from Software, not the kinds of games where I can back away from it for like a few weeks, like I did with Sekiro, and then jump back in where I was. So I restarted the game. I was 10 hours in on my other save, and so I created another save, and I'm about 5 hours in, basically to the point where I was in the last save. So it took me 5 less hours because I was not bashing my head against some of the bosses because I finally knew how to do it. But I'm back at the boss I got stuck at, and I'm making headway on that. So I'm excited to push forward a little bit more in that. But Observation was kind of my big new venture in games this week.
Cool. All right, so I've been playing some more League, trying to get better at it. I don't know how much better I'm getting at it, but I feel like I've got to learn like 5 or 6 more characters before I can really start to play competitively, or even just in PvP. I've been playing a lot of bot matches, but my brother-in-law's been doing an awesome job. I streamed it a little bit on Sunday, and had some people in the chat that were helping me out. One person who tried to help me out way too much by trying to jump into my game with me. But I've been having a lot of fun with it. And then I bought Spider-Man during the Days of Play sale, the big summer sale that Sony had. And I've only played the first like maybe hour of it. So I'll have more to say about it when I play it some more. My PlayStation's hooked up in the living room, and I don't really think of that area as like a gaming space anymore because I do all my gaming here at this computer. So when I'm out there, I don't think like, oh, I should fire up Spider-Man, but I'm going to try to make it a point this weekend to play some more. Maybe even just move my PlayStation in here and stream it some. So, and then where I want to linger for a second is I tried the Fallout 76 Battle Royale, the Nuclear Winter.
I'm interested to hear about this.
So all of the reservations that I had about a Fallout 76 Battle Royale mode came to fruition while playing it. I said this is when they revealed it, when we were doing the Bethesda reactions on Popped Off's channel with them over the guys at Project Esports. I was like, Battle Royales are so reliant on good mechanics to not make it feel like you're constantly getting cheated by the game that I don't know how Fallout 76 is going to do it in any kind of satisfying way. So I'll start with the negatives. All of the problems with not just Fallout 76, but with Bethesda games in general when it comes to gunplay, Fallout games in general when it comes to gunplay, carry over into this. Nothing feels polished. In fact, everything feels a little jankier even than normal, which is way jankier than any other Battle Royale game. And I know that this is supposed to be like a beta for it that they ended up keeping in the game for people who've paid for Fallout 76. But there was a lot of like falling through the world. The way that you choose where to land is really fun in one way and really weird in another. So you're all in the vault, and the more you play, the more the vault gets open and you can kind of explore it. And I think there's some storytelling elements that you can interact with in there to kind of learn the history of this vault. And then there's like a 2.5 minute countdown, which feels entirely too long. But
that's way too long.
But the 2.5 minute countdown is so that you can explore this vault. So I get to an extent what they're doing, but it's like a finite space that after a certain amount of time, people are going to have explored. So just get me into the game. Or a guy like me who doesn't really care about exploring it and riding on the ellipticals or standing in the boxing rings. Like, I just want to play.
Also, the appeal of so many battle royales is that you go in, you might die very quickly, and then you can get back in very quickly.
Yeah.
So this seems to run counter to the model that's been kind of proven successful.
So I don't know how much of Waypoint's E3 coverage that you listen to, but they did probably about 10 hours of content at E3 podcast content. But they were talking about how this mode to them was strange because so much of Fallout's lore around the vaults is that there's all these crazy people that have been put in charge of the vaults, and that they run all of these either physical or social experiments on the residents of the vaults, and that to have this like battle royale mode to determine who's going to be in charge of the vault really kind of runs counter to that. But a part of the lore of this is that the original leader, I believe he died and set up this battle royale thing for everybody to fight over who it is. So it kind of aligns in that way. And I think that part of the reason that they are like 2.5 minutes to explore is because, like many games in the past have tried, they want to connect this multiplayer experience to the bigger universe of Fallout and make it feel like it's just a part of Fallout and not some orbital thing that exists outside of the lore of the rest of the game. But I'm with you. I think it really kind of kills what makes Battle Royale appealing to a lot of people, because it's really frustrating when you drop in and you die, and then you die because you felt like you were cheated by the jankiness of the game, and then you got to wait another 5 minutes to find a match, explore the vault, load in. But the way that you choose where you land, which I believe is where I was starting with this, after that 2.5 minutes, a map pops up and everybody gets to like place a marker on the map, and you can only see your team's pins. But then at the end of the countdown, it reveals where everybody's pins are.
Yeah, Larry was talking about this the other week.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it's kind of like either oh man, that's good, cool. We don't have people, or oh shit, there's like 40 of us here.
Yeah.
and again, it's cool, but what so many battle royale games have is this like pre-lobby waiting area where you get to play around with the guns and run around the map before you like get put into the plane to drop. And so I've found myself, when I go to play this mode, when you get loaded in, because you don't drop in, you just load onto the map wherever you set your pin, it always takes me a solid like 30 seconds to a minute to like realize, oh shit, yeah, this is the real game. And it's made even worse by the fact that when you load in, your character is invisible. You can't see him, because that's just how shitty the game loads. Like, it's not a design choice by any means. It's just textures are popping in and character models are popping in. And so right there in like the first 30 seconds, minute, if you're in the same building as an enemy player, you may pop into the map before they do, and they can see you before you can see them. And so where I'm playing on the Xbox One X and it loads things a little faster, like I'm almost at a disadvantage in the early game because people can see me. And so that's the negative of it. It doesn't run well. I didn't expect it to run well. But the positive of it is I like a couple things. Number one, there are certain aspects of the Battle Royale that are tied to your progress in the survival mode of the game and the adventure mode of the game. You can carry cosmetic items that you earn in the Battle Royale into it. You can carry cosmetic items you earned in the PvE mode into the Battle Royale. There's a card system where you can get buffs, and you're allowed 7 cards, but you can only use cards that are at the level that your character is in the PvE mode, in the adventure mode, which is cool. It kind of is this incentive to try everything. And so me playing the Battle Royale made me think like, oh man, I should maybe just jump in and level up a little bit, because I got a couple cards I want to be able to use in the Battle Royale mode, because it can do things like you deal more damage to creatures in the world. So there's like there's a PvE element to the Battle Royale as well, where you can kill creatures that are in the wasteland. They drop ammo and items and all kinds of like kind of special materials that you can get. And so it's a trade-off there, right? Because when you start shooting, everybody knows where you're at. And so I like that element of it. There's other ones that are like when you revive an enemy, they have they have 50% of their health for like 30 seconds until they can apply their own health. So yeah, it encourages you to get back into the PvE mode as well. So there are things that I like about it. There's also a little bit of like a, not Fortnite-esque base building, but base building in the sense of like, you can build a little fortress and set up like auto turrets outside of it, but it takes a little bit longer than like a Fortnite would. And so there's that kind of map manipulation in, I think, a more accessible way. Because one of the big things with one of the big things I don't like about Fortnite is I'm just really bad at the building. And there are other people who are really, really good at the building, right?
There's a really high skill ceiling for that stuff.
Yeah, so it's not quite to that level by any means. And it's reliant somewhat on schematics that you find in the world and material. So it's not like limitless building that you can do either.
Yeah.
So there's some of the stuff in it that I like and that makes me want to keep playing it in a weird way, like despite the jank.
That's Bethesda in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's really weird, man. Like, I don't think the mode does anything particularly awesome, but they did such a good job of making it feel really uniquely Fallout, which was something I was really nervous about because it just, Battle Royale in that universe just felt a little shoehorned in.
Yeah.
So
can you drop nukes?
Yeah. So you can find launch codes. You have to find, I think, 4 launch codes and then a briefcase. And it's actually really cool. So you can find power armor and stuff out in the world as well. Yeah. So I'll regale a short story, but we made it into the final two teams. And so the circle was getting really, really small. And one of our teammates, just a random, had gotten a full nuke. And he decided he was going to drop it on where he believed the enemies were. But the problem was we weren't quite in the circle yet. And he dropped it between us and where the circle was, in our path to get into the circle, because it does like a massive amount of damage in a small area, but then there's the fallout for it. And so just like in the regular mode, when you like step in water, you take radiation and it lowers your max health, things like that. So when you drop a nuke, it's that tenfold, right? So you take on radiation really fast. He ended up killing his entire teammate. It's like his entire squad. So me, Larry, and our other random, because we didn't have power armor. And then he was just walking around willy-nilly thinking he was invincible and just got freaking yeeted off the map. So we ended up losing. But the nukes add an interesting element, especially late game, because it's really... It's a sizable area of map denial from the Fallout. Yeah. And it denies it to everybody because I think that may be the only thing where there's friendly fire, where everybody's kind of impacted by it. So
yeah, I have ongoing issues with how this latest Fallout uses nukes, but that's for another, I think that's probably for another conversation.
Just the indiscriminate use of them?
Just, yeah, the way it's kind of recontextualized it, both in the universe and kind of within our own world.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. There are some problematic elements to it, but
yeah, it doesn't make sense really narratively in Fallout 76 because it's all about reclaiming the world after nuclear disaster. And why would you continue to perpetuate nuclear disaster in the world you're trying to reclaim?
Yeah, and gamifying nukes is kind of a little odd in the real world because it's kind of insensitive, but also in the fiction they've created because the nukes were such an impactful and like world altering cataclysmic event, and now they're kind of used willy-nilly. It's the same thing they did with power armor from Fallout 3 to Fallout 4. In Fallout 3 it was like something you built up to, and these were like, this was power armor, it's in the name, it's powerful kind of elite equipment, and in 4 they kind of give it to you, I think, within the first few hours just to kind of tool around with.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right. Let's jump into our topics, Cody. And
let's do it.
I will kick us off. E3 is over. E3 2019 is behind us. And so I wanted to do kind of a post-mortem and more of a big picture conversation around E3. I thought we did a really good job of breaking down the individual conferences last week, but I don't think we really touched on how we felt about the conference as a whole in both the reveals and the vibe, and kind of reflecting on Sony's decision not to be there. So just wanted to take a step back and just ask you, how did you feel about E3 2019 in and of itself, and also relative to years past?
I think last week I used the phrase, it was one massive throat clear for next year's E3. And I still stand by it. I think in a lot of ways Sony was probably smart to sidestep this year's E3, because I think it's largely what we didn't hear about, that I think people are still thinking about. So like concrete details about Microsoft's next console, what the next generation looks like. These are things that will obviously be the focus of next E3, and we'll probably see a lot more. I think we'll see a lot more games that we aren't already aware of, even with all the leaks next year. I think probably part of the problem this year was that everything was a known quantity before we even entered the conference. And that's increasingly been a problem as this generation kind of winds down, and developers and publishers and console creators make space on their calendars for the upcoming generation. So I think I don't think it was a terrible conference. There were still some exciting moments, but there weren't as many get hyped moments, I think you could say, as in past years, and there just wasn't as much. It felt kind of diminished in that we can sort of see what's on the horizon, and this was kind of just ascending that hill slightly, and we didn't really get that much exciting stuff. There's still a couple new games I think we were all excited for. We talked about that last week, but largely, kind of compared to the last maybe 2 years, it was a little bit lackluster, I think we could say.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. I thought that I think the highest grade that I gave was like a B minus, or maybe even just a B, for the individual conferences. So we didn't touch on like the PC gaming show, but I enjoyed the PC gaming show probably more than I enjoyed many of the other conferences this year, because it had the quirkiness that Ubisoft generally has. Yeah. And I thought it just had a really good rhythm. I thought it highlighted game developers in a really good way. And we got a little bit of that across other conferences, but I don't think we got nearly as much of like, hey, we're going to bring out this person to talk about their game. Even like at Bethesda, where they brought out, and help me with the name of the lady who talked about Ghostwire Tokyo.
I can't remember her name.
I think it's Nakamura is her last name. But like even her, they brought her out, and she talked about working with the creator of that game, but she didn't really talk much about the game itself, you know? And I felt like that was something that was missing from this year's E3. But the PC gaming show did that really, really well. And then with Xbox, I don't know, man. Something about the Xbox conference, not to rehash any conversations that we've had, but it's starting to feel really cookie cutter each year with Xbox. Like they tend to follow the same rhythm, and the last three have really all felt very samey, and they're banking more on the number of games, the volume of games that they're showing, rather than the way in which they're showing them, or the impact that they're making with the announcements in and of themselves. And so I think all of that kind of, and then Sony just not being there. And Sony, say what you will about their 2018 conference, yes, it was weird, and they took some risks that I don't think necessarily panned out, but it was at least like interesting to watch.
It was an attempt at something.
Yeah. I felt even worse for the people that attended the conference last year, and seeing some of the tweets of like, they just let us into this church.
That was the best thing ever, following that narrative. Oh my God.
I wish we'd have had, we would have started PvA radio by then. I'm sure we would have had some really great conversations around that. But I just felt like this year was lacking a lot of the risk taking. And I think it's because nobody really wants to step in it the year before we're going to start talking next gen. And even, and not even just the console makers, right? Like, I thought Bethesda played it pretty safe, and Ubisoft played it extremely safe. And maybe it's partly because they can't really talk about what they're working on next gen until the console makers themselves make the first move. But yeah, I just felt like everybody played it really safe, and there wasn't a lot of risks that were taken, and not a lot of just like you said it. There was a couple things that got me excited, but not nearly the volume of stuff that I generally get excited about.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to the timing of this E3.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be interested to go back because I honestly don't really remember much about the E3 preceding the launch of the E3 before the E3 preceding the launch of Xbox One and PS4. I don't remember much about that. Yeah, and then the one before that, before 360 and PS3. I would be interested to go back and watch those to see if there was kind of a similar dearth of kind of content, but
well, I think it'd be a little apples to oranges. Just
yeah, they're
E3
in different
was
places.
so different. You know, we went back during the PvA nightly rundown because Beal for Real, host of Project Esports, sent me a link to I think it was Konami's 2010 E3 press conference, and it was this dinky stage with like a pulpit on it, a lectern, and then this tiny projector screen, and they were like, okay, you can go ahead and play the trailer now, you know, and like with their bar graphs, because it was an investor event, right? They were talking to shareholders, and so it'd be a little bit of apples to oranges, but I would be interested in just going back and looking at the actual like content of the announcements that were made.
That's kind of what I'm talking about. I think it's like the industry has changed so radically since then, and with it E3, but like I would be interested to see the announcements that were made, and if they were similarly underwhelming.
Yeah,
but I think the point you make about, especially about Microsoft, they're just like the way they presented the games that they showed. I think I probably could have been a lot more excited about some of the games that they did show if they had.
I'm sorry. Say that one more time, because you were.
I just think I could have been more excited about some of the games Microsoft did show if they'd shown them differently. I think it's especially Bethesda's lack of risk taking also comes down to the year that they've had.
That's true. That's true.
But I think there's just a lot of vamping going on. Kind of, they did have things to show off. I don't think a lot of these publishers and companies had enough to fill out an entire show's worth of material.
Yeah. One of the big narratives that really came out of this year's E3 was the lack of gameplay trailers that we saw. Or let me correct that. The lack of gameplay trailers that we saw coming out of the on-stage conferences.
Yeah. Yes.
And so there's been some, opinion pieces written about why that is, but I wanted to kind of get your sense of, did you feel that way watching it, that there was like a lower volume, and if so, why do you think that is?
Yeah, this is something that we talked about during the live stream for Microsoft, I think. It was something we started to pick up on. It's something that bothered me in the moment, but retrospectively does not that much, because we've seen, and I haven't read the piece that you linked in the show notes. I'm sorry, I just didn't have time. But
it's probably mostly all the same arguments you've heard other places.
Okay, yeah. I mean, for me, it largely comes down to, if a developer has something to show in terms of gameplay, then I'm more than ready to see it. But more often than not, we've seen developers show very vertical slices that were obviously very much designed for the E3 stage, and that are not representative of a game that could be years away. And that's obviously, especially with like Watch Dogs, has resulted in like some actually serious consequences for the performance of those games.
Yeah.
So I think I ultimately would rather see just a stylish trailer that they labored over than gameplay that's not representative of what will eventually be seen. And it's like why Doom Eternal is so awesome, because we know, I mean, that game's coming out this year, granted, but we like what we're shown is what that game will look like.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with this idea that like I don't want to see gameplay for a Watch Dogs that's gonna just completely misrepresent what the final product's gonna look like. And I think that at least in my memory, in my history with E3, that's been the most egregious example of a game because I don't know, like I went back and watched that trailer like sometime last year, and I was like, they really did just like show something entirely different than what that final product was. But we've seen, and look, I think that is a completely legitimate like gripe to have that. Oh my gosh, you showed us this one thing that looked incredible, but it was nowhere near indicative of the final product. But as most conversations online go, they've gotten more ridiculous, and it's gotten much more pedantic. Like, and so like think back to last year, and this is the example that's been going around with like Spider-Man, right? And there was that scene where he drops in and he's looking over all these thugs, and there's some water puddles in the concrete of the warehouse. And then when the game comes out, they were like, holy shit, there's not nearly as many puddles in this. You know, like, and so one of the arguments is that with this level of scrutiny, it isn't worth it because there's the lack that gamers are more engaged with the media that's being shown with far less understanding about what they're actually seeing, right?
And how it's made.
Yeah, like that these are vertical slices of games that have not released yet, that are still going through final polish. And then when you're in the bug squashing phase and the polish phase, yeah, we may need to get rid of a couple visual details in order to make things run better. Would you rather have 12 puddles and the movement's a little choppy, or 9 puddles and it runs like a dream, you know? And so I agree with that point. And then another point that I haven't seen as much of is just that from what I understand, the heavy lifting that's required to get a vertical slice, a playable vertical slice ready for a conference is insane.
Yep.
And takes away from actual development because it's not necessarily work that can be redeemed by, oh, well, that's going to be in the final game. Like most of the time they're going back and reworking those sections anyway. And so it doubles the work on those sections. And so it's just easier to put together a CG trailer that's more just kind of representative of maybe certain mechanics or a certain vibe you're trying to get across. I'll bring this up as an example, even though I think this was maybe the weirdest example of a game we didn't see any gameplay of, and that was Gears of War. I mean Gears 5. Like this is a game that's releasing in 3 months, but yet we didn't see a single. And we had seen a ton of gameplay for it last year, but we didn't see any of this year, which makes you wonder, like, was that a downgrade? Is it going to be a downgrade from what we saw last year? Or like, what was the logic behind that? But they did a really good job when they were showing the escape mode of like the CG trailer they showed you how some of the mechanics will work, shows you the vibe that they were trying to go for with the game, with that game mode, but again, still no gameplay. So I can see those two arguments. And then another thing I've just been seeing crop up this has been on Twitter and in Facebook gaming groups that I'm a part of, like just this idea. They're like, one of the things I saw, and I always bring these up, not to legitimize them, but because it's just a funny point of conversation. But this guy was like, they should just start calling E3 behind closed doors. I feel like everything that they're showing is behind closed doors. I'm like, dude, this is nothing new. But it's this narrative that's cropped up that's just like, look at all these developers hiding behind closed door demos. And it's like, they've been doing it for like as old as the gaming industry.
I think it's the high profile example of Cyberpunk 2077 last year, and the reviews or like the impressions that were coming out about it last year, especially because there's so much media attention focused on that game. It's kind of like reinvigorated that conversation. And you're right, this is something that's been going on for years, and it largely isn't an issue. I think it can actually, in the case of Cyberpunk, it really helped the kind of mystique of that game and the appeal of that game. I just like the Avengers example is the one that kind of tickles me the most, because I think people really obviously really want to see what that game looks like, because they didn't really explain the game on stage. But based on what we heard about behind closed doors kind of footage, I don't know if people would have wanted to see what was shown behind closed doors.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think people want all this stuff, but I think let the developers kind of choose how they present their games, because more often than not, they know. I think they know the best way. I think I do want to kind of go back to one point you made before about the sheer amount of work it takes to create a vertical slice for E3. That's something that I haven't seen. Disappointingly, I haven't seen as much of a point of conversation this year. And I think it's always brought up every year, but it's been overshadowed by, I think, other conversations. I just think you're right. Like, a perfect example of a way to generate attention and evoke what the game could be in people's minds without nailing it to visuals or gameplay is the trailer that was shown for Deathloop. We understand enough about kind of the concept of that game, but there is mystery about it. You can kind of pick out mechanics in the trailer, but it's stylish as hell and kind of evokes a very specific style that the game will probably end up going for. But we haven't seen gameplay of it, so we can't kind of form concrete impressions enough to kind of critique it yet.
Yeah.
And I'm much more in favor of that than showing something that will be utterly misrepresenting the reality of what we do end up seeing.
And it could even be the other way of just like so many of the games that are being shown at E3 are likely going to be on Xbox Scarlet and the PS5, that it's like we don't have the green light from Sony or Xbox to show you that gameplay, and we don't want to show you a lower quality version of the gameplay. And this may not reign as true for games like the Avengers or Cyberpunk that are releasing before that, but for games like Deathloop, who are likely not going to be releasing before next holiday season, like, why show gameplay when you can't show the highest quality gameplay that's available? And then, so I'm with you. Like, at the time, I think I expressed some frustration on the lack of gameplay, but with you, like, in reflecting on it, I just think, it does make a lot more sense. And then I've never been a part of a closed door demo, but I've listened to a lot of podcasts and people that have been pretty candid about what those experiences are like. One of my goals is that this podcast will grow to the point where we can go and actually cover E3 one year. That'd be awesome.
I'd love to do that. Yeah.
But what they're able to do in a behind closed door demo is say, hey, we're going to show you the section of the game that we're working on that is not polished. You're going to notice there's maybe clipping through the environment. The voice acting is placeholder voice acting. It's not the final actors that are doing the voices. Some of the combat stuff isn't finalized. And they can, give you the bullet points of like, this is what to look over, but this is what we're focusing on. This is how we really want you to hone in on how the gunplay looks, or how these particle effects look like. And so, whereas if they were just to show that to the public, they could say those things, but then you're going to get a million think pieces on a bunch of the little like rinky-dink sites that get shared about over on Twitter and all kinds of social media about, oh man, there was all kinds of clipping through the environment in the Cyberpunk 2077 demo, just glossing over the fact that they preface the demo with those things. Like, there's a level of education to the audience in a closed door demo to a relative extent than if they were just to let the public see it and ignore every caveat that they've made about where this is in the development phase.
Yeah, I think gamers, as we've seen over and over again, expect perfection in a process that is far from perfect. And I think filtering this kind of content through the media that at least is a little bit more aware of what can go on in the development process, and can then disseminate information out that way is a much safer way of representing a game that is likely going to change significantly. And sometimes, like, another reason that it's difficult to show a game on stage is that at the time it's announced first, they may still even be figuring out what that game is.
Yeah.
That's clearly what happened with Watch Dogs, and like it's very clearly what happened with Anthem, as has been well documented.
Yeah.
I think being able to express to media professionals and people who are kind of in at least a little bit more close to this world what this state of the game is and what section of the game they're showing is probably a better way to go about it. Also, showing an hour's worth of Cyberpunk 2077 is gonna put a decent chunk in your press conference and gonna slow it down incredibly. So you're not gonna do that.
Yeah. Well, and it's almost like a soft focus group too, because you're getting to show it to, and then you get to read what people are saying about it afterwards, like people who are trusted in the industry, what their reactions are. So, yeah. And then another thing that I wanted to touch on. Oh crap! What did I want to touch on this year? There was another question that I had for you. Now I can't remember what it was. So we're just we'll move on a bit. I want to talk about how E3 is changing and how we think. What changes do you think were just a result of, like you said, this being the clearing of the throat? And then what changes do you think? This is probably a permanent change to the way that E3 is being done moving forward, and that's kind of an open question. But looking out to E3 2020, is there anything that you're thinking like this is we're probably never going back?
It's a good question. I think the kind of content that was shown, like, I don't want to say dearth of content because there was some stuff. I just think we'll see more next year because people will be able to show us more. Whether that means new games that we don't know about or footage from games we just heard about this year. The next gen hardware being announced will give people a little bit more freedom to openly talk about games that they're developing, I hope. I do. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, and I think that's part of the reason for the gameplay stuff. So I do think that what we're talking about with the gameplay is not a permanent change to E3. I think we'll see more gameplay on stage come next year.
Oh yeah, I definitely think so. I think we'll definitely see Halo in action, if not before, at some other Xbox event. In terms of permanent changes, I was trying to think about this kind of leading up to this conversation. It's hard to say. Because I think this is such a transition year for E3 and for the industry that it's hard to say what changes we did see were permanent. Sorry, go ahead. I'm going to think about it a little bit more, but go ahead with.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is like with Sony's presence. I 100% think Sony's going to be at E3 next year. To talk about PS5, but there was an opportunity that was created for other smaller companies, gaming tech companies, publishers, smaller developers to be able to come in and take over some of the floor space at E3 from where Sony had cleared out. And from what I understand, again, we weren't at E3, but from, hearing people who were there, like, attendance was a little bit down. The show floor wasn't quite as crowded. There was a lot more diversity in terms of the kinds of companies and people that were on the floor, because I don't know if they were fire selling or if it was just they were selling smaller blocks of floor space because Sony wasn't taking up as much. But there was just this different vibe. And I think that E3 can probably benefit from more companies of varying sizes participating at it and it being more accessible, because a huge narrative around E3 is that the ESA just charges an insane amount to be there. And it just doesn't make sense for some companies on the smaller side to have a presence at E3. And I would love to see a change coming from this year being, let's create spaces where we can prop up smaller creators, smaller companies at this big event that's become less of an industry event and more of a fan celebration of gaming.
Yeah, I think the Kind of Funny showcase is evidence that there are other avenues for developers, especially small developers, to show off their games that can reach a pretty significant audience. And I'd love to see something like that pop up at E3, just because I think it'd get way more eyeballs than the Kind of Funny showcase. I do think something we saw the just the beginnings of here is, and we had talked about this before E3, and I think several of us made predictions about it that were to varying degrees true or not. But the amount of cross pollination between companies appearing at each other's conferences, or content from them appearing at other conferences, I think we'll see more and more of that moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the barriers between companies and conferences will forever be irrevocably changed. I don't think they'll be broken down. But I do think you'll start to see, I think it's just the way the industry is moving, especially with streaming and with cross-platform capabilities. I think you'll start to see a little bit more cross-pollination between companies on stage,
Mm-hmm.
especially the big three, or at least two of the big three.
And then the other thing that I don't think is going to change, and I think this is going to parlay into my very last point. I know this topic's running a little long, but gone are the days for us, and they've been slipping away from us, but gone are the days where we're going to be surprised by more than 10% of what's being shown at E3.
Yeah, I was going to mention this.
And there's been, big leaks in the past, like, oh, we got our hands on Microsoft's entire rundown for their E3 showcase and things like that. But I think that pre E3 leaks gain so much traction that it's just like, and there's so many moving pieces between retailers and online storefronts for each individual console maker, for all of the production people that have to be involved. Like, it's just a sieve.
Yeah.
E3 is just a sieve. And as much as I'm going to miss the days of like going into E3 really not knowing what's going to be there, I just think it's the reality that the cat's out of the bag and we're not. And there's too many talented people doing games journalism now, or at least too many people who know where to look for these kinds of things. Too many people who have really specific RSS feeds set up to ping them, that we're never going back.
Yeah, and I think that is disappointing. I think it's great to be surprised. I think some of the announcements we saw, the air was taken out of them because of leaks, especially the From Software reveal. But it's just kind of, you're right, it's a reality. And it has been a reality for a long time, especially with Ubisoft, which seems to be, I don't know what's going on over there.
Well,
it's an annual thing.
I think with Ubisoft, it's somewhat manufactured, partly, in terms of just because, and we've talked about this in the past, of just like, people love to feel like they've got the inside scoop on something, and companies like to take advantage of people feeling special. So I think some of it's manufactured, and I do think there is really just a legitimate issue of people who can't just stop talking at Ubisoft. And so I am curious, because this was a conversation that I feel like would have been a topic for us had we been doing regular episodes of PvA Radio during E3 and not our special ones. What's kind of your take on the whole, like, are leaks spoilers, and should people be upset about Jason Schreier publishing articles? And
I mean, it does slightly change the experience, but it's not like these are games that are years away from being released, and most of them are not showing gameplay. I don't think it's a spoiler. I agree 100% with what Jason Schreier's kind of news judgment is when it comes to this stuff specifically. Like, he's written extensively about it, and people still don't seem to get it. Like, he and a lot of great journalists in this field don't tend to report every leak until it's like kind of hit the masses already, just because, like, people are going to find out about it anyway. Like people were going to find out about From Software's new game at E3 anyway. There's no point in reporting that. It's not really elucidating anything. There are plenty of smaller sites where they'll get a huge amount of traffic from reporting that stuff, and so they do. Which it's just kind of the nature of the industry. It's kind of just a reality.
Yeah, and because those smaller outlets don't have the editorial discernment to realize, like, how's this going to impact our future relationships with these people who we're getting this information from?
100%. So I don't know. I wouldn't call it a spoiler, but I think it's kind of not really necessary to report on all the time, especially if it's going to be revealed like a few days afterwards.
Yeah.
I don't
know, man. I struggled with this because I have a nostalgia for the days of really surprising E3s, and I would love for that cat to go back in the bag. And because as much as I respect Jason Schreier, his smugness towards some things and his kind of this is my objective opinion about this, you know, and if you disagree with it, and I felt like just his dismissal of people's excitement around E3 rubbed me a little bit the wrong way, because he was all like, I'm excited for E3 because I'm going to be there and I get to see friends in the industry and yada yada. It's not about the commercials that I'm going to see. And it's like, well, I don't have friends in the industry and I don't go to E3, so that isn't what excites me about E3. Like, it was just disconnected from how the majority of individuals get to experience this event that we all tend to stop for in the gaming industry. And the only real connection that we have to E3 are the announcements that are made at E3. And so while I do think that, like, his Fallout 76 coverage, when that game was announced, I completely agree with that kind of coverage of just, they were misrepresenting what the game was going to be. The conversation was immediately starting to get away from people and thinking they knew what this game was. So he wanted to get the information out there. But with something like Elden Ring, where it's like, man, in 48 hours, we're all going to see this trailer play anyway. Those are ones where I'm like, let's not signal boost the leak, even if you're not the one who was like doing the original reporting on it, right? So I don't know. I think there should be a little bit more sensitivity to the fact that we who don't have the privilege of going to experience it get excited about these, and just dismissing it by saying it's a commercial. Like, look, I'm not a fucking moron. I know it's marketing, and I'm able to absorb it and get excited about it in the moment, and then step back from it and like have an honest conversation about what the reality of this game's existence is. But like,
there are a lot of people that can't.
Well, but that's on them. That's their personal responsibility.
Yeah,
right?
But I think there's a way to go about the conversation that he was trying to have in a much more productive and kind of probably, I guess, beneficial way for everybody involved. I think there's a way to talk with people who might not have that perspective about how E3 is essentially just companies pitching commercials for games. That is kind of, that's educational for people, so they can kind of take a step back and look at this stuff a little bit more objectively while still enjoying it for what it is, which is the next slate of possibly great games we could be playing.
Yeah,
I think he and every journalist is jaded.
Yeah,
whether or not you choose to reflect that on Twitter is another thing.
Yeah, that's my biggest thing, is that I don't disagree with his points. I just think he's been boots on the ground there so long that he's forgotten how the majority of us get to interact with this event annually. Yeah. I don't get to go have drinks with game developers after the big reveals, around Los Angeles that evening. So, like, let me not try to not make me feel bad about the fun that I want to have around this event, I guess is my big thing.
You can enjoy it and have perspective on it. That's educated.
Exactly. Yeah. So, All right, awesome. Well, I think we've talked long enough about about an event now that is in terms of news is eons past us. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Cody. What is your topic?
I don't think this conversation will be as lengthy as this past one, just because I think it's probably a little bit more cut and dry. But yeah, it was a pretty light news week. But there were some. We occasionally like to dip our toes into the waters of talking about games, game developers unionizing. We've talked about in the past. And I think for me, another thing that came out of E3, especially with coverage from Jason Schreier, who we were just talking about, was he was in each of his, I think in almost all of his interviews with developers, on Kotaku's Split Screen podcast, he did post questions about unionization and labor practices, which is, I think, a great way to kind of keep that conversation going and keep developers and publishers accountable in the public eye. Some people gave good responses and measured responses. Others did not. And one of those people, this is not to Schreier's questioning, but this is from gamesindustry.biz. They're questioning Brendan Sinclair, the editor over there. He was talking with Strauss Zelnick, who's the CEO of Take-Two, about a number of things. They were talking about kind of the potential for decreased gaps in terms of major releases. They were talking about the next generation. They were talking about a whole number of things. The Randy Pitchford stuff, very briefly. But one point that came up towards the end of the piece was about unionization, and how he views that in terms of Take-Two's approach, and especially in light of kind of conditions at Rockstar Games that came out last year. And the quote that's been sort of bandied about that we'll probably largely be focusing on in this portion is, and I want to get this right. So he said, Zelnick said, I'll expand the quote. Look, unions tend to develop when labor relations are not typically non-existent, Zelnick says. And typically, unions have been most beneficial when there were more workers than there were jobs, and where the jobs were low-paying jobs. We have fewer workers than we have jobs, and they're high-paying jobs. Right positions. There are 220,000 or so people employed in the U.S. video game business. They make about $100,000 on average, maybe more. And this is the part we're going to focus on. It's hard to imagine what would motivate that crew to unionize. But we're a compliant company and we will serve the law. If our colleagues want to engage in collective bargaining, then we will. End quote. So, there is quite a bit to unpack there. I really just want this segment to be focused on his comments and kind of how loaded they are, kind of the perspective they are clearly representing, and how this kind of plays into the larger conversation about unionization we've been having for quite a while now.
It's hard to imagine why a CEO of a large game publishing company
I'm already so excited.
Would want to minimize the reason and momentum behind a movement calling for unionization. It's hard to imagine why a CEO would want to do that, right?
Yeah, I don't know why. It's hard to imagine.
It's hard to imagine why a CEO who likely makes in the millions, if not tens of millions of dollars annually based off of both salary and stock options, just hard to imagine, you know? My favorite part about this quote is right before you said, and here's where we're going to focus. When he says, they make about $100,000 on average, maybe more. So there's a scene in The Office in one of the final 2 seasons where Nellie is talking to Daryl, and she's talking about how she wants to go get tacos, but she has no idea how much tacos cost. And she's like, here's $100 bill. What should that cover it? And he's like, yeah, I think that'll cover it. This to me just comes off as a quote from a CEO who has just no fucking clue
Exactly.
about anything. But I want to point out something that's important here, because this quote is a lot like jazz. It's about what isn't said.
Exactly.
It's about what isn't said, because he didn't say they make about $100,000 a year. He said they make about $100,000 on average. And it's like, is he talking about lifetime career at the company? Is he?
Yeah.
I imagine he meant annually, but I feel like he didn't leave that part out on accident. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
He didn't specify the range
Yeah.
of salaries. Like, the people who are most likely being paid the least are the ones who are most likely to want to unionize, and the ones who are most being affected by the poor labor practices that he is refusing to talk about here.
He's probably like, on average, our people, if you include me, on average, they make about 100,000. Take me out,
Exactly.
about 45. I don't know, man. This is such a nothing burger of a quote to me, because it's clear the motivations a CEO would have as to why he would want to dismiss the very notion of unionization, because it would negatively impact his bottom line and his take-home pay, likely, or at least the speed at which that they can accomplish production, the cost at which they can accomplish production. It's going to impact him in some kind of negative way. It'd be like, it'd be like an ant being like, I just don't understand. Can't imagine why a homeowner would want to hire an exterminator.
This is going to be such a recurring joke on here. It's hard to imagine.
Yes.
And I'm all for it. I think this is the kind of thing that we imagine executives say. And this is the kind of perspective we imagine executives have. But it's kind of, in a way, it's kind of satisfying to know that they do lack the perspective that we think they lack. You're right. This is a clear lack of awareness about kind of the reality of his employees. And by the way, he's only talking about Take-Two. I think he's only talking about Take-Two's actual employees. He's not talking about the employees at companies like third-party companies that exist under Take-Two, like Rockstar, who has received the brunt of criticism in terms of these companies. It's just I think it's just showing a total lack of awareness when it comes to the reality on the ground for a lot of developers, and misrepresenting in some ways by not mentioning what that reality is. I also think it just feeds into a certain segment of the gaming population, limited as it might be and vocal as they might be, that why are these developers complaining? They get to make games. They get to love what they do. Why are they complaining? Why are games journalists complaining? They get paid to go to E3. They should love what they do. And ignoring the actual realities of that job, that while it may be great to make video games and it may be great to write about video games, it is still a job. And within that, there are certain harsh realities that come with it.
Mm-hmm. They're the people who unironically say, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. It's like...
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's like the only people who say that are people who've never worked a day in their life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is I don't think that most of the conversation around unionization is about salary.
No.
Right? It's about working conditions. It's about crunch. It's about involuntary overtime. It's about the complete bloating of contract work that's taken place, the turnover of staff. So it's the fact that there's 500 open positions in your company, I think speaks more to the point than it does against the point, right? And what are these 500 positions? Are these seasonal positions? Are these contract positions? Are these full-time employees that get full-time benefits? Or are these people who are going to be 1099 employees that they're basically self-employed and you're just contracting? I don't know. It's so minimizing the conversation around what's going on and making it about pay, when I feel like you can go and read 100 articles about game unionization and you're going to only hear talk about pay in percent, 2% of them, because it's not where the problem lies.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even if you want to take his 100,000 annual number at its face value and analyze that, like a lot of these jobs are in areas like San Francisco where that money goes less far than it would otherwise. And even if you are earning $100,000, which is a significant amount of money, if you're putting in the amount of hours we've seen people putting in, it doesn't matter how much you're earning unless you're earning millions of dollars. It doesn't equate. It doesn't make it right.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it's commonly acknowledged that wages within, at least at the level of like Take-Two and kind of these major publishers and developers, the wages are actually pretty good. But again, like you said, that's really not the problem here. It's about the culture at these studios. It's about the crunch, the work conditions, and the culture that does contribute to those work conditions. These are the things that unionization does help with. It can help with wages as well, but that's not a point of contention for a lot of developers here. They just want to feel like their work is rewarded and people actually care about what they do and the kind of work they do. And for many of them, they don't feel that way.
Yeah. Well, and these companies are companies who, when you get to the Take-Two size, right, they're the companies that feel like they can throw money to. It's like, Naughty Dog's offering you 100,000, we'll offer you 110,000, you know? So like the salary thing, it's competitive, right? But and this is a problem with, I think, work culture in general, that oftentimes employers believe that they're paying us for our time rather than our output. And especially in like production fields like game creation, or, you know, you work in journalism, I work in marketing, like it's all about production, right? And so it's like you said, the $100,000, well, if that's paying for 70 hours, and because a lot of times it's like, the way CEOs and bosses look at this, it's like, well, you're making $100,000. We're paying you an ass load of money. Like, you should be working whenever we ask you to work, because look how good you've got it. And the salary thing is just another thing to put your thumb down on. And it's just like, well, look, I've worked really hard to make the money that I make. But you don't pay me for 70 hours of my time. You pay me for the 40 hours that I'm contracted for. And, you know, if I have to work over, there should be protections that are in place that make sure that I'm compensated for that overtime. And that's where the rubber meets the road in the conversation. So, yeah, I just shook my head when I read this quote, because I saw it in the headline snippet at first where it was like, he can't imagine. I was like, I'm sure he can't. I'm sure he's never had a job where he's felt like, oh man, this is a slog, a grind.
Yeah, it's just a complete lack of, like, there's a divorcing of perspective here from the reality of what the situation is. So I don't know. I think it's always, we've brought up a lot about the perspective of developers, and I think it's also important to bring up the incredibly flawed, but also like, you can understand why this dude would think the things he does. We understand his motivations very clearly.
Yeah.
Even if he doesn't say them outright. But I think it's important to kind of get the perspective of the people at the top too, because those are the people ultimately making these decisions and impacting these people's lives. And to know that there's a complete disregard for the reality on the ground kind of confirms a lot of things we already know.
And then the last part of the quote where he's like, we're a compliant company and we'll serve the law. It's like, well, I'm really glad to hear you're not going to skirt the law in order to continue to manipulate your employees. It's really, really fucking noble of you. Yeah.
And to be honest, if you listen to Jason Schreier's interview with, I can't remember his name. He interviewed one of the higher ups at CD Projekt Red, about Cyberpunk, but also about avoiding crunch and all that. And he kind of gave a similar response. Like, if our employees want to unionize, it's perfectly legal, and we would negotiate with them accordingly. It's kind of difficult for like a CEO to like say, yeah, game developers unionize, because I think they have people they need to satisfy on several different fronts. So that's probably as much of an admission of like as support as you'd find from someone who's higher up in the company. But I think it's everything preceding that also lends that additional weight in this case. Yeah. I think that it's like well, I don't see why they'd want to do it. It makes no sense why they would want to do it. But I guess if they're gonna do it, we would comply. Like, it minimizes. Just a shrug.
because that's a good point that you're making. Like, a CEO is not going to come out and be like, "Oh, I've got the fucking picket signs for him." Like, here you go.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm excited to see the conversation continuing to gain momentum. Not just in the gaming industry, but I just think that there's a conversation that needs to happen in general with work culture, and people our age especially. It's not about laziness. And I think people want to take it down to laziness or entitlement, and it's not about either of those things. Like, I think it's about entitlement in the best of ways possible. Like, yeah, I think I'm entitled to a little bit of work-life balance.
Yeah.
And that
exactly.
I don't have to be completely defined and find my whole identity in what I do for a living. Like, I'm so much more than what I wake up in the morning and go get paid to do. Like,
Yes.
And I think there's a wind of change that's happening, and there's a wind of legitimacy behind the gaming stuff specifically. You know, we were talking before the show about Bernie Sanders bringing it up at a campaign rally about the gaming industry, or was it a campaign rally, or was it a town hall?
I think it might have been a town hall.
But calling the gaming industry out specifically about it, and it, you know,
posted on Twitter about it too.
Yeah, and I think that this tends to be a conversation that happens inside of the bubble of gaming, which, as large as it can be, is still very much a bubble. And to see it gaining momentum and legitimacy outside of it, I think, is a very interesting thing, regardless of your politics. Yeah,
it's hopefully a sea change, and hopefully will become more than a conversation in the year to come.
All right, man. We good on that topic?
I think so. Yeah, I just wanted to briefly touch on it.
All right, fantastic. Well, we're actually going to wrap it up there. I don't want to give you any more opportunity to get up on Larry, since you're 6 points ahead of him already. So, so we'll wait for next week when he's back on, and there's no Wednesday episode next week, guys. Meant to mention that at the top. No Wednesday episode next week, because we're going to be doing our episode on Friday instead. So we will do the PvA Nightly Rundown next Wednesday. So make sure you come in and tune in for that. But
and it'll be our first in-person podcast next Friday too.
Yeah, which I'm real excited. Gosh, I'm just excited to hang with you guys. It's going to be so fun.
Rad.
So not excited about 24 hours. The more I think about it, and the more I'm like, I'm real old, man. I don't know about this. So I'm actually going to try to get some setup done the night before so that I can sleep in a little bit on Friday.
It's a good idea.
So,
yeah.
All right, man. Well, let's wrap it up. Let's get out of here. Who are you? Where can people find you? And what are you going to be tweeting about this week?
My name's Cody. You can find me on Twitter at ProElectioneer. I don't know if I'm going to be tweeting too much this week, because I do have a fair amount of work still ahead, but I'm hoping to be tweeting a little bit more about Observation as I continue to kind of unpack it. I really want to write about that game, so I'm hoping to write about it in the weeks to come as well, but we'll see how that works out too.
Nice. I'm Luke Croft. You can find me on Twitter at Hoagie_OW. And this week I'm just going to be tweeting about all of the things that it's just hard for me to imagine, you know. It's just hard for me to imagine. It's just hard for me to imagine why a fossil fuel company would want to deny climate change. Like, why?
Yeah.
Why would they want to do that? Makes no sense. So, all right, guys, this has been PvA Radio. We get together each week, and each of us brings one of the biggest gaming news stories of the week. Then we have an in-depth discussion about it. Consider it your collaborative audio feature article, or CAFA, if you will. And we want you to spam that emote in the chat. And we also just want you to send an invite out to your family. Say, hey, we're going to do a small gathering at our house. You know, bring some sides. I'm going to provide the drinks in the main chorus. But then when they're there, you've laced the meat with something that's just going to sedate them for a small bit. And then when they wake up, CAFA is tattooed on their foreheads.
PvA Radio does not endorse drugging of people.
Unless it's your family.
Unless it's your family.
But if you can't catch us live over here on twitch.tv/PVA Radio, you can catch us on youtube.com/PVA Radio, or on podcast services everywhere. Wherever you're listening to us, like, subscribe, leave a review, leave a thumbs up. Any little bit helps. We certainly appreciate it. So we are going to get out of here, and we are excited to see you guys next week at 12 o'clock on Friday the 28th for our 24-hour charity stream. Come with your hearts open, your minds open, your streams open, and most importantly, Your wallet's open. All right, we love you. Goodbye.
Why, that's the second biggest monkey head I've ever seen.
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
The definition of insanity.
Would you kindly pick up that shortwave radio?